is Dave Kjendal. I am the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer here at Senet. Senet is one of the founding members of the LoRa Alliance and one of the leading companies advancing low power wide area networking around the world. Senet, as I said, has been in this space since about 2014, just prior to the founding of the LoRa Alliance. Our initial vision was to build public LoRaWAN networks in the United States. That expanded due to the ever-changing shifts of reality. And in just after the founding of the Alliance in 2015, we actually embraced a technological initiative as well, where we focused on building core networking services that we use for our public network, which we continue to build, but we also offer to other operators and solution providers around the world. My journey in IoT really got started in 2014. So I had spent about 25 years in the telecommunications hardware manufacturing business. So built big iron, switches, routers, Wi-Fi, networking equipment, security software for the enterprise data center space specifically. In 2013, I had decided that that had run its course for me personally, and I decided to look into some new things. And so I was looking at two areas specifically, software-defined networking and IoT. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this at the time, but LoRaWAN really was the combination of those two topics together in a very interesting way. So 2013 into 2014 kind of started in looking through this. I spent, like I said, about 25 years in big companies and decided I wanted to do something smaller. So started getting engaged in the venture capital discussions here in the greater Boston area, which is where I'm from. Through that process, got to know some really interesting people and ideas. But at that point, I also met George Danaker, who was the CEO, a newly minted CEO for Senet at the time. And Senet was a newly minted company, as it were, at the time, who had this vision of bringing IoT networks to the United States. And I first heard him at a panel, and I thought he was out of his mind, that he was going to be building new wireless networks. I'm like, I thought this ship had already sailed. But as we talked about it, I really saw this interesting segment of the market that was not being served for these very low cost, low power devices that needed low cost and pervasive connectivity. And it got me intrigued. And so I joined him a few months after that as the CTO, working through the very early stages of that technology. So we grabbed the chips from Semtech. We worked very closely at the time. Again, this was before the LoRa Alliance was actually founded. We worked very closely with Semtech, with Microchip, with Cisco, with IBM, to really kind of bring this to life here in the United States. So there are other companies that were doing the same thing in Europe, but really we were the only ones in the US that were doing this. So we built our own sensors, our own end devices for heating fuel tank monitoring, which was a business we previously had. So the first FCC certified LoRaWAN devices, as well as the first FCC certified gateways, which we then installed. And we like to say that we had the first public network, so operating just before the LoRa Alliance actually got founded. So it was really very cutting edge. And being a small startup company, we were able to take those risks that a lot of the bigger companies weren't able to take. So we were able to move very, very quickly and dynamically through that. As I mentioned, when we expanded beyond the operational kind of capability out of necessity, as you kind of heard, lots of technology, lots of things to build. And so that's really kind of another component. So I started building a team from scratch here at Senet to take advantage of that. Our vision was really, again, that marrying of IoT and software-defined networking. For those who don't know, software-defined networking is really centralized control, in some cases data planes as well for networking solutions. And LoRaWAN is a centralized model. So you have these gateways at the edge, which are very simple, and they funnel data back, control plane traffic back to the core, and that core makes these decisions. And it gives LoRaWAN a lot of very interesting and powerful capabilities. And it also meant that as I grew that team, it really had a strong focus on cloud software. So our solution is a cloud-first platform as a service of a core LoRaWAN core network. And it was a really interesting pivot, if you will, from my previous work, which was really much more hardware-oriented to a much more kind of modern cloud-oriented set of solutions and technologies.
Nice. And I think kind of being there at the beginning and seeing it all come together You know, and I think you talked also there about the different partners. If I ask you first about the kind of technology and what IoT means to you, so you've also seen the evolution of IoT there, kind of from its birth or its rebirth, depending on how you say it.
Right, right.
So if I ask you to describe IoT in your words, what would you say?
Yeah, I do agree. I think it has evolved over time. So, you know, 10 years ago, IoT, I think the common, understanding of IoT, machine to machine, or things like that, it was really much heavier weight. So you're talking, larger machines with full on compute powerhouses on them, communicating lots of information. And that still happens today, of course, as well. You think about telematics in the automobile industry, and that's pretty heavy weight. But for me, that thinking really has evolved, and IoT has really taken on another aspect, which is, I've heard people say connected dust in the past. So it's really about connecting the physical world in a very, very pervasive way that wasn't possible before. And again, the low cost and the battery operated are the two kind of key components that go together to be able to facilitate that. So I really do think when you think about IoT in general, you really need to split it down that line. You kind of have those big, compute platforms, lots of data streaming that's going on one side, and then you have this connected dust kind of side. Everything in the physical world instrumented in order to be able to provide fundamentally efficiency. And that's really what Industry 4.0 is about. It's about that next wave of efficiency. And in order to get that, you need to have that data to take intelligent action on in order to drive that efficiency.
Cool, thank you. And connected dust, I haven't heard that one, so that it's quite true though. It's a nice way to describe it actually. Okay, so you touched on a few things there, and even at the beginning you talked about Senet being part of this ecosystem, and even at the very beginning it was quite a global stage that you're talking about, the different kind of components coming together. And then there you talked at the end there about kind of Industry 4.0, the kind of big revolution in industry, and then you've got smart city, smart agriculture, and all the other stuff going on. If I ask you to describe the ecosystem as you see it, so there was the technology which we just discussed, but now the ecosystem and the different players that are within it, or the different layers that you need to come together, the different skills, how would you describe it from kind of Senet's point of view?
So I think specifically, markets always evolve over time. So the kind of this connected dust, this low power IoT stuff is still, I think, in its early stages. And in its early stages, you have this really unique dichotomy or set of stresses on the market where by necessity, as an organization, you might have to do many different things in that technology stack, as I described. So we built hardware, we built the software for the hardware, we built the network, we built the core network software. You do all these different things because you have to. There's not a partner in the market that you can take advantage of. But that, if the market is growing successfully, that changes relatively quickly. And you find players who are bringing expertise into those different segments of the technology stack. And then you need to be able to kind of quickly realize what your core value proposition as a company is, and focus on your core value proposition and partner with these other companies that are complementary to the technology stack and the overall go-to-market. And we've seen that happen, very, very concretely in this space, and Senet has seen that very concretely. So over the course of 2016 to the end of 2017, we shed all of our hardware components. And we kind of knew we were going to do that. We were hoping we were going to do that from the beginning as the ecosystem and the marketplace partners develop. So the first thing that we shed was the gateway business. So we didn't want to be in that business. It's complex. It's kind of, again, my history from a long time ago is building those kinds of pieces of hardware. But that was one of the first parts in the market to really fully develop, where you had companies that were focused on the gateways, they were doing a good job, and you could take advantage of that. One of the things I like to point out is that the first production gateways that we bought off the shelf were less than half the cost of the ones we were building ourselves. And that's the power of an ecosystem, right? Of bringing those market forces to bear. And it's also the power of having that clear vision for your own business to say, this is where I'm going to focus and this is where I'm going to partner. I don't need to control everything. Of course, in order for that to be true, you do need to have some standards that exist for how those different layers of the technology stack work together. And again, that's part of what was powerful about the LoRa Alliance at the time. And I think, you know, the other part, and this is a little bit of a, maybe a little bit of a tangent, but in order to have an ecosystem of partners who are complementing each other in their go-to-market strategies, you do need to have a vision for how they play together. And that was for us one of the big differentiating features of LoRaWAN versus the other low power IoT communications technologies that were very prevalent in that 2014 kind of time frame. So if you think back to OnRamp and Newell and Sigfox and all of the others, that was a huge variety out there. But of all of those, it was really LoRaWAN and the LoRa Alliance that had this clear vision of an open standard, an open ecosystem that facilitated that you know, collaborative go-to-market specifically.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice couple of points there about kind of the standardization, which allows many to kind of work together the most efficiently, and also the fact that it costs you, you know, twice as much to make something versus buy it, you know. So it's also, you know, really understand your own core strengths. So some nice points there. Thank you. And if I then ask you then for a bit more of the human, so we talked there about the technology, we've talked there about the kind of ecosystem and the players and kind of what that means to work together. But if we then talk more about the people or the kind of skills that you need. So you talked right at the beginning about being really inspired, you know, by somebody and then coming in and working together and bringing in that mix of skills in order for the startup to kind of get going. Just given the maturity of the ecosystem right now and how many new companies there are all doing new stuff, all trying to build a new market, you know, this is all kind of, you need to be happy with doing something for the first time.
Yes.
What's the core skills or approach or leadership styles that you would kind of be thinking about or hoping to see when you work, and also with the people that you're working with?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. There's lots of interesting aspects to that. One of the things that is, you know, foundational to any business is you have to have a great team if you're going to be successful. I was very fortunate. As I mentioned, I had worked at some large companies before. I had a lot of people who worked for me. And over the course of my career, so out of the, you know, many hundreds of folks that I had, you know, had worked for me over the course of my career, I was able to find those individuals who I trusted, who were the top of their class, as it were, and bring them in on the basis of how exciting and interesting this work was going to be. And that is really, it's only a certain set of people who have that passion for something that is new and exciting. New and exciting also brings risk. So you don't necessarily know what you're going to be working on or what that's going to turn into, or maybe you're going to work on it for 6 months and you're going to have to change and go do something else because the market's evolving that quickly. So you definitely need a team and individuals who are agile, not just in their coding style practices, but in their thinking, so that they're able to take the experiences they've had in the past and bring them into this new market and shape what they're doing in a very real-time way. And, you know, my teams here at Senet, you know, are the technology and the operations teams. So two very different teams, but very technical teams on both sides. And so that sort of a kind of a thinking and approach, again, is not, it's not present everywhere in those teams around the world, but it is kind of what you often associate with kind of high tech, you know, new startups, you know, you need that kind of thinking. But the same thing is actually true on the sales side as well, in the business development side. So this is something that I think is very poorly understood in many cases, is that when you have a new market, it's not like you've got a sales playbook and you can go in front of every customer and you can go through the sales playbook and your customer knows what you're selling and they know how to compare it to what else is on the market. In these new markets is completely different. So you need to educate the customer about what the opportunities are here. You need to brainstorm with your customer about how these new technologies and capabilities can have a positive impact on their business. And so it's a very different sales methodology and cycle, unfortunately, than a lot of the traditional elements are. So the overall team in this environment, I think, has to have that mental flexibility, that mental agility, to be able to maneuver in this space. And to me, that was really one of the most important things. So the second part of my answer will be a bit more about kind of, I would say, generally kind of culture management style in these things. And I think that goes, again, in many cases, people look at this as something that is what I'm going to describe as stereotypical for a venture startup. But I think these things apply to businesses of all sizes. You definitely, and I believe very, very strongly that I need to communicate very transparently with my teams. If they don't understand, not just what I'm asking them to do, but why I'm asking them to do it, we're never going to be successful. And you really see that in very sharp detail when you are in a very small team in a venture group, because every action is critically important to the success of the company, from the CEO down to the most junior person in the company. And really, that should be true of companies of all sizes. But you certainly see it when you're at this size directly. But without that ability to communicate the why, you're never going to be able to have every employee acting individually, but in concert for the goals that you're trying to achieve as an organization. So to me, that explaining of the why is a critical piece, and it's always a struggle because why takes a lot longer than how or what. So why is absolutely one of the most important pieces, and I think that builds a culture of ownership within the organization as well. So when individuals understand why they're doing something, they have a much higher tendency to own what it is they're doing and the results of what they're producing. And I think that is ultimately one of the most important kind of pieces. Also, I believe in, and people say this in different ways, open door policies, whatever, but I do believe very much in we're all in this together. So we have I think we have a relatively flat organization. We have very open lines of communication. And we work to build, camaraderie and a feeling of, a really feeling of team as opposed to business, as it were, per se. Of course, we're in this as a business to make money and all those things, but we do it as a team. And the most important characteristic of that, it gets back to the why kind of mentality as well, is that you need to have that relationship, because whether you want to or not, you need to trust the people around you to be good at what they're doing and to complement what it is that the rest of the team is doing. So in a nutshell, yeah.
Nice. And I believe all of that stuff. I'm completely with you. And okay, so so we've kind of covered a bit of technology, the ecosystem, and kind of the people skills. So, but I think also Senet, you're dealing with a certain type of customer, and often kind of more the enterprise thinking customers, the ones who are trying to change big ships, but as well as the small startups. But so I wanted to ask you about the advice that you would be giving people. So this is people who are trying to implement IoT into their business, trying to make the change, maybe use data-driven decisions for the first time, whether it's part of a bigger digital transformation. But people who are new to IoT, who are setting up and implementing that change internally, what advice do you have for them? And maybe you have an example of a typical kind of Senet customer who's trying to do that.
Sure. So I think, as you said, there really are two very different classes of engagements. You have the smaller, more nimble companies that are very, very conscious of if you will, the bets they're placing on the technology and the impact that it is to them. So, Senet is very much that way ourselves. So, we understand when we go do something, like, we're all in it because there's no other option. We're not placing multiple bets on multiple technologies, and you have to focus to be successful. And those kinds of companies in the IoT space are very easy to deal with because they have made the same decisions that we have in terms of their focus. Sometimes there's other challenges about access to markets and scale and all those kinds of things. But from a decision, a commitment level, they typically are very committed. On the larger company side, like you said, the large enterprises, operators, kind of traditional operators, utilities, these companies, very large companies, and again, as typical as companies get larger, they get more conservative in their decision making. And that usually means it takes longer and the process can become a bit challenging. So my real recommendation to everyone doing anything is always this. It's always, you have to take the first step. So you have to start marching down a path towards a goal. Don't assume that that goal is never going to change. I had a CEO in my history once who had said something to us, which was, when we set the vision for the company and we steer the company towards that vision, it's not like you're driving a car. It's like you're sailing a ship. And you set a North Star and you may have to tack and you may have to come about and you may seem like you're going in a slightly tangential direction for a long period of time, but it is not a straight line. But it's important to get off the dock because if you don't, you're never going to get there. And I think for these large companies, sometimes that can be a real challenge, is understanding how you allocate a reasonable budget for that initial period of exploration. So you need budget to do exploration, but you should still be setting interim goals. It's kind of like the agile software development kind of cycle. You need to be making intermediate progress that's measurable and definable. And that's the most important kind of critical element there. I think there's another aspect as well, which I think is critically important in IoT. And I think one of the things that has maybe painted IoT with a bit of a bad brush in the past is there've been so many grand visions of these massively interconnected solutions where the value is only realized at the last step. And this is counter to what I just said, where you need to be realizing measurable progress and value at each step along the way. So the other kind of component that I would make sure that I would try to have people understand is try to identify that first set of use cases that have standalone business value. You need that. It doesn't necessarily need to be, you don't need to knock it out of the park on that first use case, but you should have standalone value there. And that is typically a first order problem, is what I say. So first order problem, for example, is, take something simple. So in cold chain, you're monitoring refrigerators and freezers. Your first order value is, I want to make sure that if food gets spoiled in the freezer, I throw it away. I don't try to sell it to somebody. First order problem. So that's the encapsulated value there. You can start imagining second and third order values on top of that. Like, well, maybe I can use that information to do predictive maintenance on my freezers. That would be great. And that would help me as well. And maybe if I'm running a whole lot of stores, I can use that also to maybe do something around energy conservation. Maybe that's a third order opportunity. But if you start with the third order, which is the incremental value as the first use case, a lot of times you're not going to make it through your general manager. He's going to kill the project before you get there.
That's super good advice. Yeah. And and it's finding that one that's right for each business as well, because it's different depending on the business and how that business is measured and rewarded sometimes also. Right.
And don't get me wrong, there are some absolutely fascinating, second and third order use cases. This is really kind of where magic starts to happen in the IoT space. And a lot of people like to focus there, but you can't get away from your bread and butter, as it were, from what starts out at the beginning. Let's pay the bills, let's get that basic information, action that information, and then we'll start talking about how we monetize data and how we combine it and do machine learning on that to do something really amazing.
Well, that answer actually touched on my last question, which is about success, really, and it's kind of what success means to you. I asked this, and you can answer it at whatever kind of level you want, but because you've got Dave as the person, you've got Dave as the CTO and COO of Senet, and then you've also got Dave representative on LoRa Alliance. So there's a number of different hats that you wear. But if I ask you what success means to you, how would you answer that?
well, luckily all three of those things are intertwined. So, um, so from a personal perspective with respect to what I'm doing here, working on interesting projects is the thing I think is most important from a career perspective. Being able to have a direct impact on what the company does and how successful it is goes along with that hand in hand. And those are the two foundational principles there. As we start looking at a little bit more, and I think, again, there's a lot of commonality between how I think what's good for Senet is also good for the LoRa Alliance, because for Senet, we are successful with scale. So scale is what defines success in the kinds of, in the half of the IoT market that we started with, which is this connected dust side. So obviously connected dust, you don't get a high ARPU, you don't get a lot of revenue per connected piece of dust. So in order for this to be interesting, in order for these Industry 4.0 problems to be solved and these kind of second and third order opportunities to start showing up, you have to have scale. And so scale is really where you get that, you see the proof of commitment from the companies and the ecosystem, you see those opportunities that are coming out. And I think with respect to the LoRa Alliance, that's obviously a big component of it. I think obviously how we achieve those things in the two organizations is different. So in the LoRa Alliance, it's really about making sure that we clearly articulate, identify, market what the value proposition is of the unique technologies that we're bringing to market, and make sure that we stay true to those messages. Just like in the technology stack, if you try to be everything, you're going to fail at what it is you're trying to do. You need to find your value prop, and you need to focus on that and embrace the companies that are around you that are collaborative, solving other problems in that. I think the same thing is true with LoRa Alliance and those technologies. Is articulate that, focus on that, make sure we're the best at that, and continue to evolve that process. And again, open, inviting, bringing the ecosystem in is a critical component to that.
Cool, brilliant. And do you have just 2 more minutes? I just wanted to ask you about Corona specifically, because all of the interviews I've been doing have been during this pandemic time. And I counted it all up today. I've spoken to 16 different nationalities. So everyone is experiencing it in a different way, but many people have been able to use the technology for good in some way, in the kind of aid of the pandemic. Is there anything that Senet's been doing beyond kind of just how you work in the office, but more using the IoT technology that has had any influence in the Corona time?
Yeah, so I think, it's a little, the pace of product development is slower than the pace of the spread of the coronavirus, unfortunately. So I think there are certainly a lot of tools that are out there today that we are evangelizing and we're demonstrating that are very useful in helping businesses of all kinds, governments, kind of deal with the coronavirus and the challenges there. One of the ones that I think is kind of interesting to us, again, as we're starting to investigate how do we bring people back into the office and what are the criteria that we use for that. This is, I think, something that can be broadly used everywhere. And there's really some basic capabilities that exist in the ecosystem today that can be applied to this problem. And if you think about that, so in a smart building, a connected office kind of environment, even simple things like temperature, humidity, air quality monitoring are the key metrics that you can use to understand, has your building the correct airflow patterns? Is it taking, is it bringing new air in? Do you see these events? So we've seen those trends to be very indicative of the quality of the air and the various other things that are very important to saying it's safe to have people in the building, because we know that the air is being filtered, that it's coming out. So we're doing that right now in our building with our landlords. We're instrumenting those things so we can see these are the rooms that have airflow problems. You can see by the rising CO2 levels when somebody's in there, or by the humidity. We have on-site showers and things like that that people love to use. We live in a great part of the world where everyone likes to go out and exercise, but that's a really challenging thing in this time and age, this day and age. So being able to measure that and say, this is when it's safe to use that facility again, because we know the air has been exchanged at that point, is really, I think, very interesting. The other thing that I think is a bit more novel right now, as it were, that I think is going to be very, very important as we come out of this, is you see that how the healthcare system has been stressed. And I think there's a whole application of low power technology for that could be enormously valuable. And I think specifically what we've seen here in parts of the United States, and specifically in the Northeast, New York and Massachusetts areas, as hospitals have had to adapt and take advantage of secondary spaces to provide care. So that might be a football stadium. It might be a university dormitory. These sorts of things have really put stresses on the already strained resources that the hospitals have. So for example, like, where are the ventilators? Where are the beds? Where are the IVs? These problems in a hospital, the criticality of them in a standard environment may have not reached the point of action. But now when you think about, well, my ventilators may be 6 blocks away at at Columbia University instead of at New York Health, that's really important to know that they're there, that they're being used, and if I need one, I can go grab one from where they are. So I think those kinds of use cases will start showing up, and in some cases, they may even start being legislated as being requirements for how these critical care facilities are able to expand, when surges show up.
Some really nice practical examples there as well. And just, you're right, all of that technology exists in the ecosystem already. So it's things that are available and can be implemented immediately. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dave.